Jake Gyllenhaal in the early 2000s to his agent. So, did I get the role of Spider-Man? No, you didn't. Sorry about that. Man, but sometime in the future I did manage that you will eventually play some kind of villain certain amount of movies down the line. What? Come on. But don't worry, it's gonna be fairly not half bad. But you will be in a Spider-Man movie. Alright, whatever. How long can it take?
Decades later.
Well, not that
or
long.
a decade, yeah.
A decade and a half.
Right.
So hi, welcome to End Credit Reviews. On episode of After the Credits on End Credit Reviews. This is Tyler from End Credit Reviews.
And Steven from Steven Lawson Studios.
And this is our review on the movie Spider-Man Far From Home. I will admit, when I first heard the title of this movie, I thought it was going to be one where he's in outer space and that sort of deal.
Sure.
But no, he's just on a vacation to a foreign country in that. So in Spider-Man Far From Home, it's about Peter Parker, played again by Tom Holland, and of course he is back with his friends, and they decide to go on a vacation that's funded by the school over in Europe. Now, of course, he runs into a interesting new character who is fighting these monstrous villains known as Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and Tom Holland's character of Peter has to try to figure out to try to tell, or how he's going to tell his feelings to MJ, played by Zadina. But anyway, I gotta say before we get into the movie, I gotta say that there's no way that the high school that Peter goes to was our high school. They were so cheap. There was no way they would have ever done something cool like that. I mean, the high school we went to back in the day, they were too cheap to afford air conditioning.
That's true. That is very true. You're talking about the video thing they were doing?
Well, not just that, but I'm talking about going on, a vacation to Europe.
Well, to be fair, I think they did have a couple things like that, but you did have to pay like several thousand, and I'm sure it was not, a very qualitative trip. It was, if anything, just a couple days.
Well, maybe at the newer high school, but I didn't go there.
I remember my friend did go to London in, I think, 2011. When as part of the high school. But yeah, I mean, the way they portray it is very Hollywood and not nearly probably what it would be in reality.
Well, bottom line, we got cheated out. But anyway, I mean, at least they could have provided the video thing. Steve and I would have dominated that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, back on track. So, what did you think of Spider-Man Far From Home, Steven?
Well, I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I was worried a bit because I honestly found the last one to be fine, but underselling. The Spider-Man that we've known from, Tobey Maguire at least. No comment on Andrew Garfield, but he kind of played second fiddle for so long, and they still in this story have him kind of coming into his own, which to a certain extent feels a little rehashed from the first Spider-Man film in the MCU, but with Mysterio's presence in this film kind of serving, at least initially, as sort of a seemingly understanding, older mentor type of figure, I think it kind of worked. And of course, things complicate because, if, as any Spider-Man fan knows, Mysterio is not who he ever seems to be in any version, hence the name being Mysterio and his sets of powers. But I think that in general, there were some definite improvements in this film. I would say that I felt that the beginning of this was a little choppy. Something about just how they had to do exposition for Endgame and then kind of just get things moving. Some people may not have a problem with it, but I found it was a little all over the place, and then it kind of smoothed out towards the middle and ending.
Okay.
So I definitely enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll get into the things we enjoyed, like Alex Jones-esque sort of return of a certain person that we truly enjoy in the Spider-Man films. But
Yeah, I mean, I think Steven kind of jumped the gun in the spoiler section for a tad bit. But anyway, I'm not so sure. I wanted to ask you, Steven. I mean, anyone who has any vague familiar with the Mysterio character in the Spider-Man comics should know what, happens in the movie. I mean,
Sure.
It's not necessarily a spoiler, I would say, because, but anyway, it turns out that, like, oh, I'm just this hero guy in that. But it's like, yep, surprise villain cliche, except if you're familiar with the source material, it's not. And personally, it reminded me of Syndrome from The Incredibles, where he created a false flag event so he could become seen as like a superhero.
yeah, no, that's true, and a better case Mandarin, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
But
not a joke,
right.
pretty much. I mean, that's kind of upsetting that knowing that we'll never get like at least for now, we'll not get an actual Mandarin from the comics, and it's super disappointing that of all places, Marvel Comics, who have the most creative control of their own property, decided to go with that choice.
Yeah, I agree that was disappointing, and I get to a certain extent they were going for down to earth with Iron Man's character, but
But that's kind of stupid because there's like I heard the character from the comics was like an alien, but there's clearly established aliens in this universe.
oh yeah, absolutely.
So I felt like that was kind of dumb. I mean, this feels like the crap that 20th Century Fox would do in one of those Fantastic Four movies where, we're going to make Galactus a giant space cloud.
True, yeah.
Or whatever. That was just really stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I mean, the movie itself, I thought it was fairly enjoyable for what it was trying to do. I could tell they were trying to do more teenage things. And again, like the first one, they were trying to do some kind of John Hughes-esque kind of, things with the characters and that. And part of me felt like, okay, that was kind of interesting. But part of me felt like, well, I don't know, this kind of doesn't make Spider-Man as big of a presence like we saw in the previous movies, no matter what your thoughts are on the Tobey Maguire or the Andrew Garfield ones. Those movies, Spider-Man felt more of a presence, and we kind of probably stated this in our review on the movie Spider-Man, Homecoming, and that sort of deal. But anyway, Tom Holland again does a pretty good performance as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I find it kind of funny that, well, the reason why is he's called Tom Holland, that's his name. I don't know if it's a stage name, but when I think of Tom Holland, I typically think of the director of the original Fright Night from the 80s and the original Child's Play from that time period as well. And sadly, I can't just call them Fright Night and Child's Play because they both have been remade. And that, I mean, just really just show the complete lack of originality is pretty void in this day and age.
That is very true, very true. Yeah, and I know that Tyler and I were talking about, especially towards the end, the music choice in this film and, reinforcing that John Hughes vibe. And, while I'm not opposed to that and, necessarily pandering once in a while to the 80s crowd, I think especially in the case of Marvel, it's getting a little out of hand. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy, it makes some sense with Quill having, his tape player that he brought with him. But to a certain extent, it just constantly feels like we're pandering to the 80s people, and they got to realize that their audience is not just, hey, wasn't the 80s great, whatever people. And so I would really like to see them at some point sooner rather than later default to that and actually, have some more creative music choice, some more creative direction that isn't, well, let's just John Hughes this up. Let's go a bit different.
Yeah, or just do like a instrumental score of the Spider-Man 60s cartoon theme. Why not just tap into the 90s Spider-Man cartoon theme for once? That hasn't been done to death like the 60s one. I mean, as much as I loved hearing the Godzilla theme in the recent Godzilla movie, mainly because it hadn't been done before, and that movie is definitely more towards the fans than more of a movie, which is why, some people weren't liking it that much.
Critics. I wouldn't call them people. I would call them, critics.
Well, closest thing to whatever species they are, but anyway. But the thing is, I did enjoy the banter of the characters. I feel like the dialogue with what the characters had to say was pretty good. However, there is one big issue I had with the movie, and even it's kind of mild spoiler stuff, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It's not like, what, you spoiled that for me? It's pretty much a subplot within kind of a subplot. Is the whole thing of, like, Peter's friend, Ned, they're on the plane, and then suddenly off the plane, it's kind of like Betty Brant, played by Angouria Rice in the movie. She, they hook up, they become a couple. There's really no chemistry, and then at the end, we just broke up. And I was like, the arms out, like, what? I'm trying to remember what movie it was. That scene from The Last Jedi when where Leia was flying through space all of a sudden, and that arm expression you gave, like, okay, movie. That is pretty much what I had. I'm like, that was just a subplot to kind of pad up the runtime and to kind of give some kind of things for the characters to do.
Quote-unquote development to his character. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. That was very strange. Maybe
he should have been on a laptop in a dark room. As you were saying, the previous one, he kind of looked like, who's the guy who helps Kim Possible out?
Oh, I've forgotten his name, but yeah, he really, he missed the mark in terms of, like, he should be whoever the young black guy is that helped Kim Possible and Ron in Kim Possible. If they ever actually want to take a serious go at it, not that walking horror that is the recent Disney Channel, live action remake. But
yeah, also another. I'm not trying to rip into this. It's not like a big deal or whatever, but I'm just kind of tired of the subplot, or not subplot, but the cliche in stories where you have, a guy who's pretty average in looks department, and, the woman he's dating or whatever is just above him. The whole, like, Marge Simpson, Homer Simpson thing that's been going on for just too long in that. I'm not saying that every couple can be like Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, or now it's Brad Pitt and, Jennifer Aniston now. But the thing is, they need to kind of match up in that sort of deal. Like, Angouria Rice, she is pretty cute in that, but I'm not saying she's like, oh, she's so gorgeous and that sort of thing, but it's just that it doesn't necessarily match. They didn't really have that much chemistry. I know it was played off more for comedy, and people are saying, oh, you're just looking too much into this. But then again, that's how sociology teachers keep their pay, I guess.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I feel like, if anything, it's more of a chemistry thing. I from my personal experience, I think that looks for a lot of girls appear to be, at least over time, secondary. Or you make them laugh so much that their eyes are closed and then they don't see how you look. But in any case, yeah, I agree to a certain extent. There is, especially in this case, it's like, come on, really? And if there was any, development to their chemistry, it was certainly all off screen, and we're just sitting there in disbelief, like, get out of here, what is this?
Okay, yeah. So aside that sort of deal, I will say that I did like how we did get a little bit more of chemistry and dialogue between Peter and MJ, and it's not Mary Jane, it's actually Michelle. But I'm perfectly fine with creating a new and original character, because nowadays we're, not so good, pretty cringy time in which people are more obsessed about checking off, a list of like, oh, this diversity, this group of people, that group of people.
Diversity quota, yeah.
Instead of trying to create a good story with very well-written and interesting characters. I feel like MJ, what they're doing with her, is a good example of that, where you have an original and new character that seems to be earning that sort of status, rather than just like, okay, you're Mary Jane now, deal with it, folks.
Plug and place, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty stupid. But yeah, I mean, also, I forget the guy's name, but there's this kind of love triangle that kind of goes on.
Oh yeah, was it Zach or something?
Brad, I think.
Brad, yeah.
Yeah.
Who is okay? And I don't understand this. Like they mention mild spoiler, but for people who haven't seen Endgame, I guess here's your chance to skip forward or whatever.
Well, Spider-Man's alive in that.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty clear. But basically, the snap happened and it was undone, so they call it the blip now, and so the math just doesn't add up. High school is 4 years long. And the snap we know was 5 years, yet for some reason they go out of their way to explain that Brad is 5 years older and is still in high school.
He must have been a super senior.
Did he drop out like 2 to 3 times? This is ridiculous.
Maybe
he just shouldn't be there. Like
maybe he failed the Constitution test.
I don't know, but
we knew some people who definitely failed that.
Yeah, that's true, but the math under no circumstances adds up. Like to me that was it, and they went out of their way to explain all this and then have him there. It's like you could have just not said anything and people would have put that together, but not rubbed it in our face and just be like, who is this schmuck? What?
Yeah, it was just there to be a love triangle that felt a tad bit forced.
True.
I will say I did love the beginning of the movie where they have this whole like slideshow of a memory of, and when they show Vision, it's so low quality.
1080p boys.
And then it showed like they showed like these birds flying, and I'm like, this is birdemic quality birds. And then they show like, I don't know, like a time stamp, like it was Getty Images.
That was great. And I even like how the student news people, there was the straight-laced white blonde girl who was trying to be very appropriate and keep things as is the right way, and then there's the other black guy off to the side that's kind of just like, yo, shout out to my boy Tony, and that was so funny.
And the boom mic kept appearing a little bit too.
That was hilarious.
Yeah, the movie did succeed at the funny moments while it was trying to do in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like how they did capture a lot of Europe from time to time with the various shots and that. And I really wish... Wait, one sec. And I really wish I could go over there someday, after college and that. I would just love to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's a quick question, Steven.
Sure.
Of all the countries that they visited in the movie,
mm-hmm.
which one would you want to go to?
Probably London. I mean, in all honesty, they went to several places that looked pretty neat, but just in terms of like cultural significance, I would say for me, London is out of the places probably, if anything, where I'd want to go, just because I like a lot of things in British culture, whether that be like Doctor Who or Monty Python, or just things and locations there that are important to world history I'd like to see. So
yeah,
how about you though?
Yeah, I kind of see that, but I think London is pretty low on my list because I heard that they have a higher like murder rate than New York City now.
Oh wow.
Or at least a stabbing knife rate.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so I'm like, and that.
Well, I got some cushion. Maybe I'll be all right.
Yeah, you don't have Christopher Nolan Batman quality suit on standby.
True.
But the thing is, for me, I would say definitely Prague, because it's very much like, Eastern Europe is very unique and I would say underrated and doesn't get as much attention compared to more the west side of Europe. And also, I do love the very old school, kind of mild fairy tale-esque look that, a lot of Eastern European countries have maintained. as well as just Prague looks really cool looking. And I would love to go there too because I heard a lot of the scenes in the movie Van Helsing were filmed there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's my pick. All right, so back to the movie itself. I felt like the action was pretty good. There's a few shots where like, oh yeah, that's a pretty cool looking shot right there.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of it's CGI, but I just do like how they can be creative with the action.
Yeah.
And I do like it in a movie where they are, creative. They think a little bit more outside the box. It's not just standard, do this, do that. But I will say my favorite part when it came to those moments is when they're in Venice. And, we had, people were speculating it was like hydro or whatever at first. But the funny thing was, he didn't have his mask on. So he put like on a, mask in that was there.
Yeah,
and it was like a jester mask. And I automatically thought of like, why you cosplaying? And I thought of myself, this legitimately reminds me of the movie Van Helsing because the sidekick character Carl, when they went to that costume ball, he was wearing a jester costume and kind of a mask too. So it looked like that.
Right.
So I thought it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, I said when you cosplay on a budget or something like that, just like this, he didn't have the suit, so puts on one little mask, and it's a terrible cosplay equivalent, so.
Or I don't know if you noticed this, but when he was at that fundraiser in the beginning of the movie, there's some kid or whatever that has like a Spider-Man makeshift mask that was just like a bottom of a paper plate with eye holes cut out.
I did notice that.
Yeah, it was pretty good in that. But then again, it's like, kid who's probably, less fortunate that got a chance to be there for the fundraiser, which is understandable and perfectly fine. But the thing is, the part where he's trying to stop the tower from falling and then he gets hit in the head twice with the bell.
That was funny. Yep.
Yeah, that was pretty good in that.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty funny. I think we already talked about, decent amount of spoilers stuff, mild stuff. But anyway, fast forward to this part if you don't want to be spoiled by anything.
Right.
All right, so the part where it's revealed that, oh, I'm the villain now. It's only a shock to people who've never read a Spider-Man comic book in their lives.
Dun, dun, dun! Yeah, no.
I felt like it was interesting that they said, like, they kind of hinted at, like, oh, yeah, his technology from, like, Civil War and that guy from the first Iron Man movie was there, too.
Right.
But the more it went on, it kind of felt more like forced exposition and explaining stuff. Just kind of a bit too much force-feeding the audience.
I agree. There's a rule in filmmaking, obviously, of show, don't tell in general, if you can avoid it, just because you want the audience to get to those points and whatnot on their own based on what you show on screen or what you hint at visually. And this was the complete antithesis. They just had Jake Gyllenhaal basically spill his guts and, hey, let me explain all of my evil plan over drinks. And that was like, I don't know, you could have said parts of it, and then, we kind of just see the rest, because obviously the stuff with the drones and stuff was important. So they could have kept that relatively under wraps until the end, and then surprised us as to, oh, so that's how he's doing it.
Yeah, the movie had to have more of a bigger third act, which I can kind of give a little bit of a slide to. But yeah, I do think they should save that revelation for the third act of the movie.
Agreed.
More so, if you're gonna, at least do that sort of thing where you explain stuff, the third act is the best part to do that sort of deal. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I will say I do love the scenes in the movie with Mysterio where it gets very effects heavy.
Yes.
And I've been wanting to see this kind of thing for a long time from this character.
Same.
It was at one point, it was kind of rumored like maybe Bruce Campbell was gonna play Mysterio in the Sam Raimi series. Which would have been interesting, to kind of see that. I think we had a friend of ours who had his idea for where if a fourth one was made, maybe his character was like, watching and following, Peter Parker to figure out he was Spider-Man, and then he, became Mysterio because he has kind of an entertainer kind of background in a way. So I feel like that would have been kind of interesting path to go.
That would have been.
But speaking of Jake Gyllenhaal and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, a lot of you probably don't even remember this, but Jake Gyllenhaal was an actor that was considered and auditioned to play Spider-Man back in 2002. In fact, when Spider-Man 2 was going to go into production, that was a lot of going to. Caught myself, that sounds stupid. But anyway, when that movie was gonna start filming, Tobey Maguire got into an accident during the movie Seabiscuit, and the studio wasn't so sure if he could, heal in time for the filming for Spider-Man 2 to start, and they were legitimately in talks to have Jake Gyllenhaal come in to replace him, but luckily Tobey Maguire was able to heal up and got into playing Spider-Man again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, don't feel too bad, Jake. You were able to eventually get into a Spider-Man movie.
That's right.
And you got to bang, the actress who played MJ.
Wow. He went there, boys.
It's called The Truth.
Yes, it is The Truth. But
I don't think either of them are going to deny that. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I will say that there's a part in the movie where I thought, okay, it was kind of an interesting plot twist in the mid-credit scene where it's like, and his real identity is Peter Parker. It's like, what?
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, because obviously they were going for, they're comparing a lot Spider-Man to Iron Man, obviously passing the torch, as it were. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. To me, that was a bit too on the nose for the I Am Iron Man thing at the end of Iron Man 1 in this case. So, well, I think I'll ultimately be okay with it, because it'll probably have interesting ramifications for like a Sinister Six situation where, Vulture ends up getting out of prison and then all these guys are coming after Peter Parker. That could be interesting, but at the same time, I don't know. That to me felt a little too convenient and forced. I will say, since we're in spoiler territory right now, that it probably makes sense, since Mysterio, at least apparently, dies, that this will give his character more overarching significance. Mm-hmm. But I just don't know, to kind of... You need to let Spider-Man have his own thing. You can't have him just for his trilogy live in the shadow of the MCU and Iron Man perpetually. And that's something that I think they really, in the next one, need to break out of. I don't know how you feel about that, Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, I like to jokingly call that the MCU doesn't necessarily stand for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Mm-hmm. By this point in time, it's more like the Marvel Cinematic Union.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because, it doesn't matter about the quality of our stuff. We'll automatically make a lot of money.
True.
And that sort of deal. They're more... they're definitely... This goes to, any cinematic universe. Mm-hmm. It definitely becomes more about quantity than quality.
Absolutely.
When it comes to that. Because on average, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the Nolan Batman movies were, on average, better in quality because they're more concerned about trying to tell a good story in a good movie.
Yep.
In the cinematic universe-esque things, it's more about trying to get this thing out and that thing out, with making a really good one from time to time, but making pretty, in the middle, C+, B-, more so B-.
Filler material.
Yeah, that sort of deal.
Yeah.
Leave them hungry to come back for more. But yeah, remember at the end of the previous one where they're like, oh, I heard you know Spider-Man's identity, where the Vulture found that out. So I'm like, okay, he's going to have some leverage to kind of get the Sinister Six going. Mm-hmm. And now this one, okay.
Everyone knows.
So there's really no point to the Vulture's importance of his knowing his secret identity.
Yeah. It's a fair point. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, that's a problem I thought of, wait a minute. After I left the auditorium, I was like, wait a minute. So much for that sort of thing. And then I will say that people loved it, as was myself, to see J.K. Simmons finally back.
That was great.
As, J. Jonah Jameson. And I thought to myself, are they ever going to do Daily Bugle? Are they not in this? Is Uncle Ben not important? I mean, right. I think the Nostalgia Critic even brought it up when he reviewed that movie. He said, wait, there's no Uncle Ben about the whole great power with great power comes great responsibility thing? Isn't it the equivalent of removing Batman's dead parents from a movie?
Kinda, yeah. I guess they could be building towards either Happy filling that role or, they reference it at some point. But they really are just kind of not regarding that element, which is I don't know. There's several things about this, things around the Spider-Man and the story he's in that are questionable. But still, with that being said, I think that it was overall pretty solid. And I agree. I love, similar to in the PlayStation 4 version of the Spider-Man game that came out recently, that the take of this Alex Jones-esque version of the J. Jonah Jameson is a really funny direction to take it. So, and also just in terms of Tyler and I were even joking about how Mysterio's powers being so faked are like the fake news and the globalists. Mysterio even has a round head, and is in making all these fake events happen. So I thought that was pretty funny and interesting.
Yeah, but anyway, I'm gonna avoid saying their names so YouTube doesn't just prematurely just takes us down or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the thing is, as much as I felt like it was amusing to an extent, because I thought to myself, well, isn't this kind of shady that they're just taken down all of a sudden and people aren't just an uproar of it? Because who is going to come next all of a sudden?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, oh, how are you going to justify this, organization or that group of people?
Oh, yeah.
Where does that come in?
It's definitely a serious issue that, needs to be talked about.
And it wasn't even by, any government whatsoever, too, with any kind of credible, the law behind them either.
That's true. It's almost entirely just unaccountable corporate entities that basically through, what establishment figures deem as, well, that's not very civil. They kind of just push and lean on these, entities to police what they say is okay, and that's not. We all need to resist that very heavy-handedly.
Yeah, or at least question it. it's something that you would see out of the Phantom Menace with the Trade Federation does something completely illegal.
Yep.
And, the big, Republic doesn't really do anything about it.
Orson Welles is doing barrel rolls in his grave right now.
Yeah, he looks like a jet turbine by this point. He looks like, like a tornado.
Yep.
Like, you see those Superman cartoons where he does that spin to, go underground?
Yeah.
Yeah, alright, so alright, I don't know how much more we can say about it.
But. Yeah, pontificate about this, but...
How we're gonna top it.
But yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Steven, what would you give Spider-Man Far From Home?
Well, again, I fleshed out a lot of the elements. I think it was a bit...
No pun intended.
Yep. But I think this was overall a bit of a step up from the last one. I think that the first act was a little choppy, but it is in comparison to the prior film, but it was still overall a bit better in terms of the direction of Spider-Man and the villain. And I definitely like what they did with Mysterio. I think that worked overall, and it was a fun film in any case. So if you're on the fence about this, I would definitely recommend it. It was not, I'd say, as good as, Endgame necessarily, but...
Definitely.
Yeah, it was still fun. If you like Spider-Man, you're going to like this movie. If you're not sure about it and you liked Homecoming, I would say it's a bit of a step up above that. But definitely see Endgame first, if for some reason you haven't, just to understand a little more. But with all that being said, I would say if I were to grade this film, I would give it probably about a dead-on 85%. Kind of just midline, not low B, but, it's a B for a grade, I'd say.
Okay, well, personally, this movie is definitely much better than the previous movie I saw, which was Dark Phoenix, which was a complete dud.
Yep.
I would say, that's the best you could come up with for the final, chapter and that sort of deal.
Yep.
But I will say that this is no Endgame in terms of quality, and I know it's kind of, unfair to judge it to that because it's a much bigger and grandiose movie, or grandiose, whatever grammar Nazis, if you're still there or relevant. But the thing is, part of me feels like, I mean, I know I don't want to sound like a snob who just feels like all mainstream media and movies are just all the same and just dribble for the masses and the peasants.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Kind of like what Jenna Colesmith probably thought when we met her.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we are just going to keep tearing into her.
Brie Larson be like, is that a personal attack?
Yeah. Her agents are just going to contact us at some point. Hey, can we have a deal so you stop just, like, tearing into her, please? Thanks.
Well, maybe we can meet her, and maybe she could actually be nice to us.
How's that?
And not, like, forced nice, like you're obligated. Actually know that maybe I should have been a bit more because they paid X amount of money to be here.
Yep.
And you agreed to be here in the first place, and you're probably getting paid a good amount of money, so... Alright, so back on track to the movie itself. Back to this one. Yep. This ain't about our, WizardCon experience from a few years ago. Well, the thing is, I did enjoy the movie. There was a lot of, fun, enjoyable things about it. There was some interesting twists and turns with, like, the drone stuff, with the, Stark technology, I would say. Mm. I mean, yeah, the love triangle felt a little bit weak and a little bit tacked on. And, the whole subplot with the whole, like, Betty and Ned was, like, kind of just there. And, it's just convenient, I guess. And it was a kind of a nothing burger after all. Mm-hmm. Not as big as, like, Snoke in The Last Jedi. But the thing is, again, very enjoyable. I feel like I'm repeating myself like a broken record. But yeah, I did like the villain a good amount. I mean, he was more faithful to said source material. But then again, it does kind of get a plot hole of, so this guy previously existed, but, S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't have a file on him?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, Nick Fury was important to the story too, so WTF to that.
Yeah, but then again, they didn't know Hydra was in their organization for decades. But yeah, again, I did like where they went with the movie when it came to the location filming, as well as a lot of the creative stuff they did with Mysterio's character was very excellent. I've always wanted to see what movies would do with him being very effects heavy, and I can't criticize the quality of the effects on that because they're supposed to look hyper real, so it's realistic looking, but not like photorealistic. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be, there's some fakery to it, which I was perfectly cool with, and I thought was pretty cool looking. And again, there's some funny stuff too, and just seeing that part where with the train, that happened, I was like, I will say I felt more for Spider-Man's safety in this one than the previous one. Although I do prefer it more. At least I do agree it's a minor step up from the previous one. I will say that still I don't think it's necessarily like a big grade of an improvement over it.
Not really.
And part of me just feels like, well, this is kind of just standard for MCU stuff. And I just hope that, later on they just step up their game, not just for the MCU, but a lot of, summer movies in general, I would say.
I agree.
So as for Spider-Man Far From Home, I would give it at least 2.5 stars out of 4, kinda 3 stars out of 4 at most. Just depends on, later in the future. Probably 2.5 stars out of 4 by this point. But again, my ratings are never truly set in stone. Thoughts and opinions can change on a movie, which is, showing why the Rotten Tomatoes score system is painfully dated.
True.
And things need to be updated. I mean, come on. A movie like the Mummy remake from the 90s, that's labeled rotten, but The Amazing Spider-Man is labeled fresh. Obviously, if you know, how things are nowadays, how the public feels about these movies, it really should be the opposite.
It should. Yeah, they've established themselves as pretty uncredible garbage at this point, but...
Yeah, definitely.
They'll stick around until they're completely irrelevant, so...
Sadly, not anytime soon. So, anyway, this is Tyler from Anchor Reviews.
And Steven from Steven Lawson Studios.
And we hope you enjoyed this episode of After the Credits on Anchor Reviews. And we hope to make a lot more in the future. Please like and subscribe. And one last thing, I just remembered it, but the thing was, I remember I rewatched Spider-Man 2 recently, and there's a part in the movie where we see this travel agency around the time when Doc Ock is robbing the bank, and there's a poster for Venice on the wall.
Oh.
And I thought that was kind of funny because they do visit Venice in this Spider-Man movie from 15 years later. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting, coincidence in that.
That is true, yeah. I guess I was going to mention, too, also, if we got an extra second, that, I thought that, on the Mysterio thing for a second, that Mysterio's effects, how you were talking about them for a while, that I think it was some of the most creative use since at least Doctor Strange. So that's my last little 2 cents.
Okay.
But.
Yeah. Thank you, and have a good night or day, whatever time of the day you're watching this.